Chapter 4. It had not been easy to escape from Strelsau and return to the hunting lodge without anyone seeing us. So when Sap suggested that I return to the capital and continue pretending to be the king, I let him know exactly what I thought. "You're mad," I said to Sap. "The plan's too dangerous." Walking up to me, Sap put his hand on my shoulder and then looked deep into my eyes. "Listen, if you're a man, you can save the king. Go back and pretend to be him." But the Duke shows where the real king is, and all his men know," I protested. "Yes, but they can't say anything," said Sap. "Listen, we've got them. They can't say anything without showing their guilt. They cannot say this isn't the real king because we've kidnapped him and killed his servant." "Will they say that?" I realized that Sap was right. Even if Michael knew who I was, he could not say he knew, but I still had doubts. "Sap, surely someone in Strelsau will realize I'm not the real king," I said. "The princess has already said she thinks the king's changed. She'll certainly realize." "Of course it's a risk, but we must have a king in Strelsau, or the city will belong to Michael within 24 hours. You must do it for Ruritania." "What if the king's already dead?" "If the king's already dead, then you shall stay king. But I think the king's still alive, and I don't think they'll do anything to him if you're in the capital. They would know that you would stay king if they killed him." It was a mad plan, even madder than the first plan, which had been a success, but as I listened to Sap, I saw that it could work. "I still worry that someone will realize," I said again. "Anything is possible, but come, Rassendale, let's go to Strelsau. We'll be caught if we stay here." "All right, Sap, I'll try," I said. "Good man," said Sap. "I'll go and get the horses." But seconds later he came back. "Look out of the window." Through the window, I could see in the moonlight a big group of men coming down the road from Zenda. 4 were on horses, another 4 or 5 were walking. I knew they must be Michael's men, and they seemed to be carrying spades, coming to the house to hide their evil work. I remembered poor Joseph's body and said, "Sap, we should make sure that some of those evil men join Joseph." "Very well," said Sap. "As a soldier, I've had a lot of fights like this. I'll show you what to do." We went out of a back door and climbed onto our horses with our swords ready. We could hear the men arrive at the front of the hunting lodge, and one called out, "Go and get the body!" "Now," cried Sap, and we drove our horses fast to the front of the building. The men looked shocked to see us and were not prepared. I easily knocked one man off his horse, then hit another big man with my sword as he moved towards me. But there were only 2 of us, and within seconds I realized there were people all around me. Just as I was about to be trapped, I saw a gap between the men and saw my chance to escape. I turned my horse and quickly rode through the gap toward the forest. My horse was fast, but as I left, I heard a gun, and I was almost shot. I could see Sap on his horse ahead of me, and went as quickly as I could towards him, waving. Then I heard another shot and felt a terrible pain in my finger. Someone shot again, but now we were too far away from them to hit us. At last, I caught up with Sap, who was breathless but laughing. "Well done," he said. "That was very brave. Do you think they saw who you were?" "Yes, one of the men said it's the king before I pushed him off his horse." "Good," said Sap. "That will give Michael something to worry about." After a time, we stopped so that Sap could put a bandage on my finger, which now hurt badly. We moved on in silence, as quickly as our poor horses were able to, until we arrived at a farm just as the sun was rising on a cold, clear day. I covered my face, saying to the farmers that I had a bad tooth before we asked for food. The farmer was kind and let us rest, but we knew we could not wait for long and soon headed off. Some hours later, we saw the buildings of Strelsau ahead of us. It was about 9 o'clock. and at this time of day the city gates were open. So we went back through the gate that we had left from. The streets of the city were very quiet, as most of the people were resting after the celebrations, and we saw almost no one until we were back at the palace. Here one of Sapt's servants was waiting for us. "Is all well, sir?" he asked. "Yes, Frailer, all is well," answered Sapt. "But the king's hurt," he said, seeing my finger. "It's nothing," I said. He caught his finger in a door," Sapt explained. "Now remember, say nothing about this. All young men like to ride their horses now and then, so why not the king?" As a servant led our horses away, Sapt said quietly to me, "Frailer's a good servant, but sometimes it's best not to trust even the best of men." Sapt put the key in the secret door, and we went back inside the palace, down the passage to the king's room. Sapt put the key in the secret door, and we went back inside the palace, down the passage to the king's room. Back inside, Fritz, who had been asleep, jumped up when he heard us and cried, "My king, you're safe! I'm so pleased!" He then bowed down in front of me. "Even Fritz think you're the real king," laughed Sapt. "I think we can do this." "Oh, Rassendale," said Fritz in surprise, "but what's happened to your hand? Are you hurt?" "It's nothing serious. What's more important is what we have to tell you." "What is it? We're the real king," he cried. "Be quiet, Fritz," said Sapt. "Don't speak so loudly. People will hear us." Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, so Sapt took me by the arm. "Quick, go into the bedroom. Take your hat and boots off and climb into the bed. Cover yourself up so people think you're asleep." I did as I was told, but a minute later, Sapt came into the bedroom and smiled. He introduced me to a polite young gentleman who came up to my bed and told me that he was a servant of Princess Flavia, who had sent him to find out how the king was feeling after the coronation. "Send her my thanks," I said, "and tell her that I've never felt better in my life." "The king's had a good long sleep," said Sapt. The servant bowed and left, and I smiled at Sapt, but Fritz still looked very serious. "Tell me, is the king dead?" he asked quietly. "We don't think so," I answered, "but Duke Michael's holding him prisoner." The next day, it took Sapt 3 hours to tell me all about the king's duties. It seems that a king's life is quite hard, but to pretend the king's life is even harder. At least Sapt stayed with me to tell me what I ought to do and what I ought not to do, and what I should say to the many important people I had to meet during the day. I was worried when I met the French ambassador, and he asked me a question which I could not answer, but later Sapt told me that I should not worry, as the real king would not have been able to answer either. I also had to tell everyone that I could not write because of my finger, so many important documents were not completed. After many hours of meetings, I was finally alone with my friends once more. I asked the new servant, who had never met the real king, for a drink, and then asked Sapt if I could rest at last. I was not used to such hard work. "Rest? No, we mustn't waste any time. Shouldn't we plan how to attack Michael?" asked Fritz. "Let's take things slowly," said Sapt. "So aren't we going to do anything?" said Fritz. "We aren't going to do anything dangerous," answered Sapt. "If people find out who I am," I said, "then I'll fight with the Duke. But at the moment, let's wait to see what the Duke does." "He'll kill the king," said Fritz. "He won't," said Sapt. "If he kills the king, he knows that Rassendale will stay as king instead, and he cannot accuse Rassendale of anything because then people will know that he kidnapped the king. And we cannot accuse him in public without admitting that I'm not the real king," I explained. "So no one can do anything. It's a stalemate," cried Fritz. "But wait, half of Michael's 6 men are in Strelsau with the Duke." "Only half? Then that means the other half are guarding the king," said Sapt. "Yes, you're right," said Fritz. "So that means the king must be alive. If the king were dead, all the 6 men would be here with the Duke." "Excuse me, but who are the 6 men?" I asked. "Unfortunately, I fear you will soon be meeting them," said Fritz. They are 6 special soldiers whom Michael keeps in his house at all times. They're completely loyal to him. 3 are from Mauritania, 1 is Belgian, 1 French, and 1 from your country. They'll do whatever Michael asks them to do, continued Sapt. Would they try to kill me? I asked nervously. Without a doubt. Which 3 are here in Strelsau, Fritz? Asked Sapt. The 3 foreigners, Dugutay, Bersonen, and Betchud. So they were not the men we saw at the hunting lodge? I asked. I wish they were, said Sapt, because then there would only be 4 and not 6 of them. I now decided that I should act, perhaps like all real kings do, by keeping some secrets even from the people I could trust the most. My plan was to make myself as popular as I could and say nothing bad about Michael. In this way, I could hope to stop the poorer people of Strelsau from thinking badly about me. Then, if there were a fight, perhaps people would not want to follow Michael, although, of course, I hoped there would not be such a fight. Perhaps I could actually enjoy my game in Strelsau, and something good would come from it. Michael would not grow stronger while the game lasted. My plan began the next day, when I rode my horse through the park with Fritz and waved to everyone who bowed to me. The more my people saw of me, the more they would realize I cared about them and their lives. I was not going to be a distant king who people only heard about, and as I had done before the coronation, I wanted to be seen most in the old town where most of the poor people lived. Riding through some of the narrowest and oldest town streets, I stopped to buy flowers from a poor young girl with a gold coin. This attracted a lot of interest, and soon hundreds of people were following me on my way to the home of Princess Flavia. I knew the princess was very popular, and the people seemed very pleased that I had gone to see her. Moreover, if I had the support of the princess, this could only help me. Fritz also thought this was a good idea and came with me on my visit to the princess's palace. I was shown into a guest room full of enormous mirrors, paintings, and beautiful furniture, and soon the princess arrived with her servants. I knew that I had to be very careful when I talked to the princess. I needed the princess to trust me, but I did not want to say too much to her, or she would realize I was not the real king. And although I wanted to show her that I trusted her, she must not think she could say what she liked to me, because I was not the man she thought I was. You have completely changed since you became king, sir, she said. You need not call me sir, I told her, for after all, we are still cousins. She looked at me and said, I'm proud to do so, Rudolph, but I think your face has changed. I needed to talk about something else, so I said, my brother's back in the city, I hear. He went away for a while, didn't he? Yes, I hear he's back in Strelsau. That's good. The nearer he is to me, the better. The princess looked at me. Do you want him to be near you, so that you know what he's doing? I'd like him to be near me because he's my half-brother. We're family, I answered. We need to help and support each other. Unfortunately, I've heard he can't stay in Strelsau for very long. I'd like him to be near me because he's my half-brother. We're family, I answered. We need to help and support each other. Unfortunately, I have heard he can't stay in Strelsau for very long. She looked at me strangely when I said this, but at that moment there was a loud cheer from the streets outside. The princess ran to the window. Then she turned to me, looking anxious. It's him, she said. It's the Duke of Strelsau. He's coming here now. I was surprised by this news and did not know what to say. For several minutes, Princess Flavia and I sat in silence. Her servants also stood silently, with their heads bowed. We could hear steps outside the door, and I expected Michael to enter. But then the steps stopped, so we continued to talk again. I cannot remember what we talked about, but I found it very easy to talk to the princess, and time passed. I thought it was strange that Michael had not come into the room, but we did not talk about him at all until the princess suddenly jumped up and said, You do know that Michael will be very angry Is that a good idea?" "What do you mean? How am I making him angry?" I asked. "You haven't asked him to come in. He's been waiting outside the room for a long time." "But of course he can come in," I said, realizing I had made a serious mistake. "How funny you are," she said. "You know that no one can enter without your permission." "Of course," I said. I'd forgotten. But the princess looked at me in a way that made me think she realized something was wrong. "I was never very good at remembering all the rules," I continued, wishing that Fritz had told me about this, "but I'll go and get him myself at once." I opened the door and went out of the guest room to greet Michael. He was sitting at a table looking very angry. All his men were standing next to him. I held out my hand and Michael stood up slowly and took it. Then I showed him into the princess's guest room. "Brother," I said, "I'm so sorry, I didn't know you were waiting, otherwise I'd have asked you in sooner." He thanked me, but coldly. Michael did not seem to be good at hiding his feelings, and I could see that he was angry with me. I could also see he was trying to pretend that he thought I was the real king. We sat down with the princess. "You've hurt your hand," he said. "Yes, an animal bit me," I explained. "It will be fine." "Is there any danger from the bite?" Flavia asked. "Not from this," I said, looking at Michael. "But if I gave him the chance to bite again, it would be different." "Did you kill the animal?" Flavia asked. "No," I said. "We're waiting to see if his bite is poisonous." "And if it is," said Michael, smiling coolly, clearly understanding who I was really talking about. "He'll be knocked on the head," I said. "But he might bite again," said Michael. "I'm sure he will try," I replied, smiling. Then, worried that Michael would say something I did not want to hear, I decided to change the subject. I told him how fine his soldiers were and thanked him for the splendid coronation. I thanked him for the great time I had had at the hunting lodge in the forest. When he heard this, he jumped to his feet and angrily walked towards the door. Then he stopped and said, "3 of my friends would very much like to meet you, sir. They're waiting outside." So I walked up to Michael and took his arm, and we entered the outside room like best friends. Michael asked the 3 men to come forward. "These gentlemen are the most loyal and honest of the king's servants, and are my great friends. I'm very pleased to meet them," I said. They bowed before me one at a time. First, de Gutte, a tall, thin Frenchman with straight hair, then Bersonen, the Belgian, who was large and about 30 years old, and finally Detcherd, the Englishman, who had a thin face, strong shoulders, and very short hair. He looked like a good fighter and a bad character. I spoke to him in English with a pretend foreign accent, and I am sure I saw him smile when I spoke. So Detcherd knows any secret? I thought. And if he knew, surely all the 6 men knew as well. How dangerous were these special soldiers, and how safe was I, even in the palace of Strelsau. To be continued in Chapter 5.